Good morning. Welcome to the Women's Health and Cannabis panel. My name is Meredith Burak, and I was born an activist, and I've been investing in cannabis science since 2011. I'm also the Vice President of Global Operations of Gyneca, a subsidiary of Asana Bio Group, which is an Israeli-based research and development company focused on women's health. This past week, we received our official license from the Israel Ministry of Health to conduct cannabinoid-based clinical trials, clinical research on women's health. Our first clinical trial, headed up by Professors Lumir Hanush and Moshe Hod, is on endometriosis. We have a lot of conviction that not only can we deal with the symptoms of this issue, but get at the root of the problem. I'm hopeful that Gyneca will identify a solution for this issue and move on to the next challenge for women's reproductive health. This is why all of us here on stage this morning, to discuss cannabis's immense, untapped healing power for women's health, and we are advancing knowledge, science, and products to ensure women live better and healthier lives. I became interested in cannabis medicines for reasons much like many of you here, because of pain and because of the shortfalls in prescription medicine that didn't address my needs. My entry into the women's health began when I was 12 years old. I had such crippling pain from my menstrual period that there was times that I actually thought I was going to die of pain. My doctor's diagnosis was that I'm just someone who simply gets bad cramps. She offered me prescription painkillers as a solution. My choices were either to suffer in pain or be inebriated from painkillers. Either way, I wasn't functioning for a few days each month. But my experience is not uncommon. 60 to 93% of the 3.8 billion women worldwide suffer from painful cramps, also known as dysmenorrhea. In the US alone, 600 million working hours, or $2 billion annually, are lost because of incapacitating cramps. On average, a woman has her period from 3 to 7 days, menstruates from ages 13 to 51, enduring 456 total periods over 36 years. This represents 6.25 years of her life. Can you imagine living for more than 6 years in constant pain? If you were living for more than 6 years in constant pain, wouldn't you want to address this issue? But I would only be introduced to cannabis medicine another 12 years later in 2009 when my mom was suffering from ovarian cancer, one of the deadliest gynecologic cancers. None of the cocktails of medicine toxins were working for her, and none of the side effect medicines were working for her either. As many of you understand, when it comes to your own health or your loved ones, when the traditional Western medical market doesn't work for you, you look for other options. These experiences inspired me to look into the medicinal benefits of this historically prevalent plant and to invest in its potential. Among the many things I've learned is that the female reproductive system has the highest concentration of endocannabinoid receptors after the brain, making women particularly responsive to the medicinal properties of the plant. The earliest references to the relationship between women's health and cannabis dates back to ancient Mesopotamia. We're talking about 2000 BCE. Currently, women's reproductive health accounts for only 4% of the overall global funding for research and development for healthcare products and services. The majority of spending on diseases has a male-specific research focus, even though 38% of women worldwide suffer from a chronic disease. Today, education and accessibility are driving rapid growth in the women's global health market, yet the field remains vastly underserved. But by 2025, the global women's health market will rise to over $100 billion. This is a $100 billion challenge for the cannabis industry. Women want scientific research and products that actually benefit us, and we're willing to pay for it. In the US alone, women by 2020 will control $22 trillion in US wealth, and 65% of women who invest are willing to pay for it, or want to invest in causes that matter to them. What bigger cause is there than your own health? I hope that this is a rallying cry for people in this room, for companies, for activists, for scientists, to emerge and address this $100 billion global women's health challenge. So without further ado, we're going to hear from a world-leading scientist, Dr. Ethan Russo, who's also a historian, and one of the few historians on women's health and cannabis. Ethan Russo is a board-certified neurologist, a psychopharmacology researcher. Dr. Russo is the Director of Research and Development at the International Cannabis and Cannabinoid Institute. Previously, he was the Medical Director of Phytex, a biotechnology company researching and developing innovative approaches targeting the human cannabinoid system. Before that, he served as Senior Medical Advisor, Medical Monitor, and Study Physician to GW Pharmaceuticals. He is the former president of the International Cannabinoid Research Society and former chairman of the International Association for Cannabinoid Medicine. He serves as the scientific advisory board for the American Botanical Council, and he is author and editor of 7 books on cannabis and medicinal herbs, including Women in Cannabis, Medicine, Science, and Sociology. Okay.
So, why am I here? An old white guy. Well, genetically, I'm a pale African. And according to that online gender quiz that I took, I'm definitely a woman. If you think I'm kidding, I'm not. As Meredith referred to, some years ago, I had the pleasure of writing an article on cannabis treatments in obstetrics and gynecology, which was the lead chapter in this book, which is now out of print. However, all of the entries are available by PDF, and you're welcome to write to me, ethanrusso@comcast.net, if you would like those. As previously mentioned, if we go back to what ancient Mesopotamia, what's now Iraq, we have the earliest reference I know to gynecological treatment with cannabis, what they called azalu, was employed for staying the menses with mint and saffron in beer. And this was a common mode of administration in medicines at that time. Also from ancient Egypt, another prescription, shemshemet, ground in honey, introduced into her vagina. This is a contraction, presumably of the uterus. And we'll see substantiation for these claims subsequently. A little physical evidence from Palestine in the 4th century. This carbonized fragment was found next to the skeleton of a 14-year-old young woman who died in childbirth. And there were THC metabolites in this carbonized fragment, and the supposition was that this was burned so that she could inhale it as an aid to childbirth, which failed in this instance, unfortunately. This is a representation, cannabosum, aromatic cane, of what we feel was cannabis in the Bible. Moving up to the 19th century, Fleetwood Churchill wrote some of the most famous works on obstetrics and gynecology of that era. The property of Indian hemp of restraining uterine hemorrhage has been extensively tried with considerable success, and the tincture of the resin is the most efficacious preparation. That would have been tetrahydrocannabinol predominant. Of the same era, Alexander Christensen, Indian hemp appears to possess a remarkable power of increasing the force of uterine contraction during labor. We already see a dichotomy. Cannabis in early pregnancy prevents abnormal contractions or miscarriage. Late in pregnancy, it augments contractions in labor. Sir John Russell Reynolds was the royal physician. It's often said that Queen Victoria got cannabis. Since we're not privy to the Queen's medical records, that's never been substantiated, but he was her doctor. He said, Indian hemp is of great service in simple cases of simple spasmodic dysmenorrhea, the same indication we hear today. Morris Fishbein was the longtime editor of the Journal of the American Medical Association, and in 1930 he said, hence, a woman in labor may have a more or less painless labor. As far as is known, a baby born of a mother intoxicated with cannabis will not be abnormal in any way. And it is actually used this way still in Jamaica and many other cultures as an aid to childbirth. This is a survey from 1999. 51% of Australian women use cannabis for treatment of premenstrual syndrome or dysmenorrhea. Apologies to Kylie Minogue. I really don't know why she was so happy in this picture. Some modern figures. There's great and appropriate concern about drugs in pregnancy. The expression is, no drug is the best drug in pregnancy. However, what are the real data? Well, this is a meta-analysis that was done a couple of years ago of 31 studies of cannabis use in pregnancy, and when confounders such as tobacco were excluded, there were no significance seen for low birth weight. These ratios generally need to be about a 2 to be significant. And when you have a 1.16 or preterm delivery, 1.08, this means there's no known statistical relationship. So basically, cannabis use in pregnancy is not an independent risk factor for adverse neonatal outcomes, and I would add that neither THC nor CBD have been found to have any teratogenic effect, meaning birth defects. Melanie Dreyer, Ph.D., did a great deal of work in Jamaica, particularly among the Rastafarian population, which at that time used a great deal of cannabis but no alcohol, and they had good nutrition. Their babies, not only would cannabis help in pregnancy with nausea, but their babies actually showed advances in their cognitive development over women who did not. It was first reported in 1862 that treatment with cannabis could allay hyperemesis gravidarum, the severest form of morning sickness that often leads to fetal demise, even loss of the mother. Wagney Lynn Curry wrote an entry in our book, Women in Cannabis, about her success in using cannabis in pregnancy, and this was the beautiful baby that she had. Subsequently, in 2006, there was a survey done in British Columbia. I was an unindicted co-conspirator on this study for political reasons, but 79 British Columbia women were surveyed. 65% used it in pregnancy. 68% of them used it for nausea, and 92% found it effective or extremely effective. And I would remind you that this is episodic use with no risk to speak of as compared to a situation where women are routinely hospitalized with powerful drugs that are largely ineffectual. This is a study that we did on patients receiving cannabis from the federal government in the Compassionate Use Investigational New Drug Program. Patients A and D were women. One was menopausal and one was premenopausal. We looked at their endocrine parameters and found that there were no derangements despite using up to 10 grams a day for many years of cannabis. So what are the indications? And you see the list here: menstrual irregularity, menorrhagia, dysmenorrhea, hyperemesis gravidarum. At the bottom of the list, endometriosis. And I just want to end with a summary on endometriosis. I have a lot more ammunition, but this is a summary. Stimulation of GPR18, an orphan receptor, increases cellular migration, and that is a key factor in the spread of endometriosis, which tends to metastasize even onto the peritoneum. Endometrial biopsies reveal reactivity for the TRPV1 receptor in women with endometriosis and chronic pelvic pain, and that's a pain receptor. Cannabidiol stimulates and desensitizes the TRPV1 receptor and should decrease neuropathic pain in endometriosis. CB1 and CB2 receptors were both reduced in endometriosis over controls, highly statistically significant, pointing out that this could be a clinical endocannabinoid deficiency disorder. Anti-proliferative effects, reducing growth, and pro-apoptotic, breaking down endometriosis effects were noted with drugs that stimulate CB1 and CB2. Both THC and caryophyllene should both be effective treatments for that pain, And an ideal treatment, getting at the cause and the symptoms, would be THC with CBD and caryophyllene. And I believe that's the last. So we'll go on to our next speaker.
Our next speaker is Rosemary Mazanet, MD, Ph.D., as she calls it, your modern-day real-life Wonder Woman, Chief Science Officer of Columbia Care. Rosemary is a clinician scientist with decades of experience in clinical development and healthcare investing. After training at the Brigham and Women's Hospital and the Dana-Farber Cancer Institute, where she was on clinical faculty, she joined early Amgen. She was given broad responsibilities to leading several product development initiatives, including FDA panel presentations, resulting in successful product approvals. She subsequently joined Oracle Partners LLC in New York as a general partner and has been a presence in public equity and private equity biotech and specialty pharma since that time. In addition to serving as a life sciences management and investment professional, Rosemary has served as a C-suite executive at several companies and led development programs ranging from IND submission through NDA approval and commercial launch. Her ability to conceive, articulate, and execute strategic development and financial vision in public and private company environments enables her to guide Columbia Care's research efforts, including at many of the top national academic sites. Among the many boards she participates on, Dr. Mazanet is charter trustee at the University of Pennsylvania Health System and is co-chair of the Leonard Davis Institute Executive Advisory Board at Wharton. Thank you very much. Sorry.
Okay, I didn't write that. I didn't write that, I swear. Anyhow, I'm here today because I'm interested in cannabis, and I'm a baby boomer. And so I'm going to make a departure from the previous remarks. I'm going to talk more about females who are actually the patients that are buying the most medical cannabis, who are really the baby boomers. First slide. Oh, I have it, sorry. I just hit this.
The big green.
The big green, okay. I am forced by my legal counsel to make this disclosure. You know, you can't believe anything I'm going to say. I guess that's sort of what I'm going to say. Columbia Care is actually a national company. We don't update this slide constantly because it would be too hard. So I can just tell you the updates. This says that we're licensed in 12 jurisdictions in the United States. That's now 13. We just got Virginia. You probably wonder why you really haven't heard the name Columbia Care a lot if we're in so many states. And that's because even though we're vertically integrated, each state was given initially its own name. So there's Capital Care, Patriot Care, Constitution Care, Columbia Care, SWC. So all of them, even though they belong to the parent company, were given separate names because we didn't want the government to think we were a cartel. Well, the government now knows, and we work with the government very effectively. And what we're doing is, as every company sort of comes on board with the formulated medical products that I'm going to describe, they then become a Columbia Care name. We've changed the name to Columbia Care officially. So we have about 30 facilities now. We have more than 30,000 individual patient interactions per month. And we see 60 different qualifying conditions. In most of our dispensaries, we have pharmacists. In New York, we have only PharmDs. We make a couple of tons of cured product a year. And we now have more than 750,000 individual patient interactions. And that's why I'm really interested in the company. Back in 2013, the company asked me if I would get involved in making a patient registry so that every patient that came in would have a mini medical record. And patients have been very compliant with that. Many states, we have that information anyhow, but other states, we've asked patients and they've given us a lot of information. We also know exactly what they're getting in their product because we have to track the purchases. So at the point of sale, we mark down what they buy. and how often they buy it. And we happen to know, because we've been doing batch analysis back to 2013, not only the THC and the CBD amount, but the minor cannabinoid amount. So now we're getting to having, close to 1 million different interactions, where you can see what people bought, what they will buy next, why they change. And that's going to become very interesting, and I think help elucidate a lot of the mysteries that we have about what minor cannabinoids are good for what conditions. So one of the things that was fascinating to me, on the bottom here, you'll see our patients are really boomers, okay? The average patient in New York is a 58-year-old woman. The average patient in Massachusetts and Arizona is a 45-year-old man. So, we're not seeing the 30-year-olds who we think of as, habitual users. We're really seeing medical patients. I show this because the qualifying conditions and symptoms are sort of all over the place. But I think the important thing to understand is many of these have at their root an underlying immune dysfunction. And I think we forget about that sometimes. We're giving plants to people. Women actually have more autoimmune dysfunction than men and suffer from those diseases more often. So we really need to understand the quality of the plants. We need to make sure they don't have contaminants. We need to make sure that there's no fungal or bacterial product involved with this. So, we really need to be very cognizant of the fact that most of the patients that we're treating, particularly the women, have some immune dysfunction. This is just to give you an idea of the types of patients that we see in New York. New York, we have the largest database, so that's why I focus on it a bit. But you can see chronic pain, neuropathy, cancer, inflammatory bowel disease, spinal cord, and then it goes down into the smaller pockets very quickly. So let's talk about women. Just looking at all of the data that we can cut, when we think about the percent female, multiple sclerosis is the #1 use that we see of women using cannabis. The average age is 51. And again, if you look at all of these ages, you'll see that really we're talking about boomers, or early boomers. Cancer pain is next, chronic pain is third, neuropathy, and then opioid reduction. Opioid reduction is actually very interesting. We just in New York have gotten, as a qualifying condition, the ability to treat opioid addiction. So this is not a condition, this is opioid addiction. And what we're seeing is actually more women are coming in looking for product in that case than men. It's very interesting, looking to actually decrease their opioids. There are a lot of other differences between men and women. The preferred formulation, we find that women, not surprisingly, don't like really the high THC. 30% is high THC, but 42% is a high CBD product. So women prefer CBD heavy product. It may be because they have more inflammation as part of their disease states. And it may also be, some of the minor cannabinoids that we're still analyzing. And, I'll be back to you on that in 2 years or so. The preferred forms of administration, also not surprising, vaporization, which is really very, very popular in men, is not as popular in women. Women prefer the sublingual tinctures, and they also like the hard-pressed tablets. So we see a difference in the types of administration. Again, I think the women like products that maybe give them an intermediate range of activity. It's not so much the acute effect that you get with a vape. They like the more longer acting effect. Again, they have different types of diseases in general. So one of the things I just wanted to point out is, we have standard formulations that we've had for a number of years now. But the new things really are focusing a lot on some of the women's things we've talked about. Okay, suppositories are very important. We have pediatric suppositories and adult suppositories to be used rectally, but we also have vaginal suppositories. So you can see that they're shrink-wrapped, child-proof, everything like that. They're rolled up and put into a canister, and we're going to be launching those very soon in New York and then in all of the other states that were available. And topical lotion as well. Some people like CBD. We believe that a high THC product probably has a lot of utility for pain as well. So we have specially formulated products, and again, these can be used for women who have a lot of eczema, who have some rosacea. As we know, there are a lot of conditions, inflammatory conditions, that manifest on the skin. So we're very happy that we'll be able to treat women with a lot of these products in the future. And again, this is not just selling product. Every patient that we see, every patient that we sell anything to, we're tracking them with their permission to make sure that we can understand what works for them and what doesn't work for them. Thank you.
Thank you, Rosemary. I'll try this introduction. Our next speaker is Professor David, nicknamed Dedi Meiri. He is an assistant professor at the Faculty of Biology at the Technion Israel Institute of Technology, a member of the Technion Integrated Cancer Center, and the head investigator for Technion's Laboratory for Cancer Biology and Cannabinoid-Based Research. Meiri's lab is one of the largest cannabinoid-based scientific labs in the world, comprised of 45 scientists. His lab is regarded as one of the leading laboratories in the world that is exceptionally equipped to ask and answer almost any question in the field of medical cannabis.
Thank you very much. I think I'm speaking in many conferences and in Israel at least twice a week. I think I've never been in pressure like that after introducing Ethan Russo and Rosemary, and I'm thinking women health. I was afraid that Meredith will introduce me. He's married 20 years and had 2 girlfriends before that. But this is basically my connection to that. I have also 2 daughters. So my lab started as a cancer biology lab when we started 3 years ago to work on breast cancer and migration and how it's blocking the ability of cells to migrate. And then reading work of Christine Sanchez, that should be here in the audience and speaking later today, we saw that it also can literally fight the cancer and kill, at least in the plate. There is a big difference between killing cells in the plate to treat a person, but we saw a connection. And then we started to work on breast cancer and ovarian cancer, but in the 5 minutes that I have today, I don't want to talk about that, first of all, because Christine's speaking later today, and then I'm speaking, so there will be enough about cancer. I want to say that my lab grew in the last 3 years to deal with many, many aspects of cannabis. I have a neuro group in the lab that's working on sleep disorders, on Alzheimer, on epilepsy. I have a group that's working on autoimmune disease. So I have many things. And we see that there is a big difference between males and females, whether it's mice or whether it's people with the questionnaires and things that we have follow up. There is a huge difference, and when we look on the endocannabinoid system, today my lab have the ability to look on over than 120 endocannabinoids. Usually people talking about anandamide and 2-NG, but there is plenty of endocannabinoids there, and also there is many receptors. So usually we're talking about CB1 and CB2, but Ethan Russo just gave an example of GPCR 18, I think it was. So there is a lot, at least 30 different receptors, and the difference between male and females on these endocannabinoids are huge. We still don't understand it, but it's huge. I want to show a work that we did with autistic kids. We follow up 120 autistic kids in Israel that get cannabis. Autistic kids in Israel that can get cannabis getting high CBD, low THC strains. We don't want to stone them. And also, these are very severe autistic kids. So these kids, very violent, usually without even eye contact, a lot of time hospitalized because they are violent, a lot of sleep disorders, and we saw improvement in many, many parameters. We checked 32 different parameters with 82% success in reducing violence, improve sleeping, reduce anxiety, and other parameters. But when we look on the difference between male and female, it was astonishing to see that in male, it's working perfect, but in female, it's almost not working. In look, we can see habits, 53% improvement in male, 0 in female. Repetitive movement, 48% improvement in male, 0 and 9% in females. Eye contact, 47% improvement in male, 0 in female. So the difference are huge, and we don't understand it. Okay, the opposite. So this is another example from totally different area. We're looking here on Alzheimer mice. And we look, the green ones are the plaques that create and cause the Alzheimer. And you see that in the control, there is a lot of plaques. And when we treat with cannabis, again, in male, we eliminate totally the plaques. But in female, there is almost no change. And you can see here the bars of many others. So what I want to say, I can bring more and more examples in sleep disorders, other things that we're doing. There is huge difference between treating male and female, especially with cannabis. It's true for many other medicines. But in cannabis, the differences are huge, especially because of the endocannabinoid system that express different. And at least I don't understand what is the cause of that and what is the reason. And I think there is a lot of research that need to be done in order to learn how to treat better women's and men's, because it's a different type of treatment. Thank you very much.
Our next speaker, Stephanie Karasick, born and raised in the suburbs of Montreal, worked as a copywriter in the corporate world for over 15 years. And when she left the corporate world, she decided she came up with the idea for strain print, which she's going to dive deeper into. She came up with the idea of strain print after her first few months of using medical cannabis, when she noticed how little information and scientific validation there was on various treatments. In her spare time, Stephanie enjoys spending time with her family, especially her amazing dog Brody, who loves to walk and volunteer. If Stephanie weren't the founder of Strain Print, she would be an on-air radio personality. Thank you. Thank you for these smiles.
Wow. First of all, I'm incredibly humbled to be here in this room amongst all of you and on this panel with such an esteemed group of people. I'm sorry, I'm incredibly nervous, but I'll try and get through this. So why am I here? Well, I'm a patient, first and foremost, and I'm also sort of a serial idea person, which is what Meredith was saying. I'm always thinking about ways that we can, improve things, our lives, based on different ideas. And my introduction to cannabis came very unexpectedly in 2014, when I was at a very low point in my life. I think my life pretty much had been a series of low points up until that low point, since I had lost my brother in 1978 from leukemia. And 35 years later, I found myself a young mom with 2 children, and I couldn't function. I was paralyzed with fear that they were going to also die, and I went to see an incredible doctor, a psychiatrist, who turned me on to the idea of looking at cannabis because she had seen and read some anecdotal studies on veterans who were treating their PTSD with cannabis, and I was like, well, okay. But she also did mention it would be more of an adjunct treatment, so that I would be on a low-dose SSRI as well as trying cannabis. And I'm here to tell you that it changed my life. What I started doing was journaling my experiences with cannabis. So I was writing down everything that I was experiencing every time I vaporized. So every time I was trying a different strain, a different dosage, different time of day, what was going on, and I was chronicling all that, and I brought it back to my physician at my 3-month appointment, and I showed him my journal, and his jaw dropped, and he did something that I heard Dr. Sulak mention yesterday. He asked me if he could photocopy my journal so he could show it to some other physicians and some patients. Of course, I said, yes, please do. And further to that, I went on about 150 walks with my dog, Brody. And I thought, there has to be a better idea here. There has to be something that I can use, make it. I think people are inherently lazy and they don't want to document things. So I came up with an idea for an app, which is essentially a digital cannabis journal, and that's called Strain Print. And At first, it is meant for a patient's experience. So to be able to capture the treatment as you're experiencing it in real time. So the app is designed, sorry, to change, sorry, I haven't used one of these. Green button? Okay, got it. Okay, so it is, as I said, it's a journaling app, and it essentially is allowing patients to find out what works best for them, which strains, which dosages. We are also very fortunate that we're living in Canada, and we have a program called the ACMPR, which is our medical program there, and all of the strains that we have are lab verified, and we have a third of those strains have full cannabinoid and terpene breakdowns. So when we're collecting this data, so first and foremost, the patient is going to be putting in the data into the app. It's designed to be very user-friendly. So we have the patient putting in a very simple setup wizard. They're going to fill out which conditions they suffer from, which symptoms they're treating, and it's going to ask a very simple medical pain scale rating. How bad is your pain now? And so what we're going to talk about very briefly is we looked at a sampling of female users who have tracked at least one session for pelvic pain. We have 332 women, and PMS, 572 women. These are women who have indicated their condition as being pelvic pain or PMS, but they're also treating for cramps, pelvic pain, and we also see anxiety you'll see in a further slide, comes up very frequently as well. So this is, as I said, it is self-reported, and it's in real time. And we have, because most of the users here patients here are Canadian, we don't have access to some of these incredible products that Dr. Mazanet was referring to, so you're gonna see that the data looks a little bit different, but I still think there's something to be gleaned from this. We see that the women who are, first of all, I do want to say that we have a fairly even split of user base, 50% male, 50% female, but the women are tracking more. So that's an interesting thing. So we see here that the women 30 to 39 are more interested in tracking and learning. So just a kind of an interesting point. We here see, try to make the slides look pretty for you guys, that vaporizing is the most common form of ingestion here in Canada right now. And again, this I believe is largely based on what we have access to. So we're going to see the numbers are probably going to change quite dramatically over the coming months as we get more products. But oil and then other would be, we have patients that make their own suppositories and their own topical things as well. So that's what other is. And we see here that if you look here, the efficacy by the method of ingestion is that we're seeing that users are going predominantly for quicker, the vaporization is allowing them so quicker relief from their pain. Whereas I think they would be happier to have a longer lasting, but we're still in its infancy there. And then I also wanted to point out here that 45% of these women are reporting that they're also tracking for anxiety. No big surprise. I think there's a lot of comorbid conditions and symptoms that happen because of the pain. And these are the strains right now that are coming up as the highest efficacy. Now, these are just names. They're not that meaningful. We do have full cannabinoid and terpene breakdowns on these strains. So we were able to determine that alpha-pinene, beta-caryophyllene, as Dr. Russo had mentioned, limonene and myrcene seem to be the common elements in these strains that are giving the most relief. So again, it's just in its infancy, but we are very, very interested in learning more from these patients, and hopefully we have a tool right now that is getting better and better, and we are going to allow these patients to ultimately tell our doctors what's working best for us and help guide and inform medicine. That's our goal. Thank you very much.
So I heard the time buzzer. Does that mean we have 2 minutes left for the entire panel?
Yes, you have 1 minute and a half.
Okay. Well, first of all, I want to thank CanMed and the McKiernans and Doug Kennedy for allowing us to be here and for introducing this new session on women's health and cannabis, which, as I mentioned, impacts about, could impact up to 3.8 billion women worldwide. So I really appreciate your support on this. And I think, given that we only have 1 minute left, I will let this gentleman ask a question. We have only time for probably a couple questions, but go ahead.
My name's Alan Frank. I'm a local cannabis physician in Santa Monica. And the issue, I guess, primarily for Dr. Mazanet and perhaps Dr. Russo, it's been my experience by doing some very simple office studies where patients were taking suppositories, both THC, CBD, and different dosing, and we measured plasma levels of those cannabinoids, which were virtually zero. And I know there's a lot of talk about what the absorption is rectally and vaginally, and for the most part, I'm seeing virtually no absorption, which accounts for why these people don't become psychoactive.
So one of the tragedies, seriously, of the whole cannabis field is that we can't do PK. PK is pharmacokinetics. It's looking at blood levels, plasma levels over time to see how much actually goes across. And this is sort of the thing that you do for every drug that you're developing, and that's so that you know how to dose it and how if it should work and when you should give it again. So, this has really been unbelievable that we're not able to do this readily. So I think that this is something that a lot of medicinal chemists and a lot of formulators think about a lot. We need to have products that we know are effective locally. We might not want them to be systemic, but we don't have a way to test really for the local effect yet. So, we need to do that. We need to standardize things a little more because patients really deserve to be able to take something and know what to expect and to know when they need to take it again and know that it's going to be the same the next time they take it.
Yeah,
so I sympathize. We're working on how to convince the FDA to let us do that.
Let's have a round of applause for our panel, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much.